are back. Oh, only 5 minutes after the last session. Welcome again. For those who are running the session or the data track for the first time, I'm Francisco Piccolini from Open Nebula Systems. This is the last session of the day for the data track, but the schedule continues. Tomorrow we have another full day of online talks, and on Wednesday and Thursday, there's 2 days of event in Lithuania, in Vilnius. Okay, so keep watching us in this session. We are going to welcome Dean Schuster. Dean is on a mission to help development teams embrace and take advantage of UX. That's super cool because, you know, when you watch the first version of Android, you say, yes, this was made by programmers, not by designers. And he will be talking about that as well and in this session. Just to remember, rate the sessions. At the end of the session, there will be a pop-up in your screen asking you to rate the session. Feel free to make questions on the Q&A or on the chat session. So that's all my message right now. I'm going to welcome Dean to stage. Welcome, Dean.
Hi, thank you.
Good morning for you. Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Good afternoon for the people in Europe.
That's
so
right.
We are,
it's
like
morning
I say,
for
we
me.
are. Yeah, morning. You will already took your coffee?
Yes, I'm ready to go.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna grab mine after this session. I'm gonna share the screen with your slides, and I leave it to you.
Okay,
So the floor is all yours.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm going to expand my screen a little bit here, and there we go. It's an honor to speak with you today here from America. I've been to Vilnius several times, and I love it very much. So if you're from Lithuania and hearing me speak, you're definitely hearing someone who loves your country. I'm going to start now and tell you that, yes, my job as a UX professional is to help dev teams embrace UX and use it to its fullest. You can find me online if you have a question later and you didn't get a chance to ask it here in the conference. You can go ahead and find me. I'm easy to find and would love to talk with you. I am the owner and partner in a UX firm called TrueMatter. We specialize in complex applications, which means we're working with developers all day, every day, and it's a great joy to do that. Okay, now I want to start a little bit with this myth from ancient times. It's the myth of Sisyphus, and you might have heard of it. There was this character and his name was Sisyphus, and he, for reasons that we don't need to get into today, he runs afoul of the gods. He runs afoul of Zeus. Zeus gets very angry at him and condemns him into Hades with a horrible, never-ending mission. And his mission is to simply roll the boulder to the top of a hill. And if he can get it to the top of the hill and it stays there, he's done. But this boulder is enchanted. And every time it just gets to the top of the hill, it always rolls back down. So Sisyphus is condemned for an eternity of rolling a boulder up a hill only to have it roll back down. He has to keep doing it again and again and again and again. And this reminds me a little bit about development. All right. Essentially, we development teams are like Sisyphus, right? We've got a lot of stuff we have to do to get a digital product right. So many things to think about. It's requirements, it's quality, it's functionality, it's testing, it's the users, it's all this stuff. It's the stakeholders that we've got to get right in order to get it to the top of the hill and have it stay there. But this boulder, for some reason, is enchanted and it always rolls back down. And it's so hard for us to develop great products when we constantly are having to do the same things over and over again and can never quite get it to finish. And at the top of the hill, we're going to imagine that this is beautiful, wonderfully functional development. It's a great digital product. It works, and it's also easy to use. That's really what we're after. Now, development teams have always had trouble rolling this boulder up the hill. So they decide that what they need to do to get the boulder up the hill is to do it a different way. They change their tactic. They try to roll it up differently. They try a different process or they try a different method. But no matter what they do, when it gets to the top, it rolls back down, no matter how they tried to roll it up there. They might think, if we want to make something usable, we should just make the boulder prettier. Maybe if we just paint the boulder, it'll be usable. And at least we've got that. But that doesn't happen either. All that happens is they roll the ball up to the top of the hill, it rolls back, and now it's a painted boulder back at the bottom of the hill. We're right back where we started. So we have this burden of doing all this work, and it seems always too hard to do. And this idea of joining UX and development is something like a Sisyphean task. That's something we call something that is super, super difficult to do and is completely futile. It will never work. That's what we call this. And a lot of people think this is true of making digital products that are great and usable, right? Laborious and futile. And I know a lot of us feel this way. I know I've felt this way quite often. Now, there's a reason why it's difficult to fit UX into a development process, right? It's really a difficult mix for us UX people and developers. And we're really different from one another. So developers have certain things in common, okay? We're super technical. We're not necessarily people focused. We care about function and data. We're trained in computer science. UX people are a little bit different, right? They may not even know how things actually work. They're always focused on people, always, always, always. Their first concern is not necessarily the system itself. And that's an important thing to remember. And maybe they don't have as much computer science background, although some do. And of course, these two groups don't always communicate well, right? When we're trying to talk to the developers as UX people, we have difficulty with language, right? And we have difficulty with how we want to speak to each other and back and forth. It's really tough. Now, I'm not saying that you will have a situation like this where you have a UX pro and a developer having a full-on fight. And I'm not saying this has ever happened in my office, although sometimes it can be stressful working together when we have such a different view of the world. And of course, this doesn't really happen. We're just having fun. Our team actually works really, really super well together. And this doesn't typify what we're like. The problem, of course, is that we don't even agree on to what terms are. Okay, so when we think about a digital product, right? Let's look at this idea of the iceberg where a little bit's on top of the water and a whole lot is below. Well, when it comes to a developer, we're thinking system, right? The system sits below the water. It's everything. It's the function. And on top of that is sort of that UI, UX stuff that people see, right? But the system's the thing. Well, UX professionals think completely differently. They believe that the experience is the thing that's underneath the water, and above it is just, of course, what you see of the experience. That's two different ways of thinking about a digital product, right? And so dev-centered teams basically lack this perspective. They lack this ability to look at things from a people-centered perspective, from a user-centered perspective, and from an experience level. Right? And that's why digital product teams that are development led or development dominated have difficulty making things with great user experience. It comes as no surprise. So the question is, how do we do it? How do we bring UX into a development process? Because it's a very difficult thing to do. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how we're going to do that, some best practices for doing that to sort of spark your imagination for how you might be able to start in your organization. All right, we're going to answer several really important questions over the next 30 minutes, right? When does UX start? How do we learn about what users need? What about requirements? How does UX fit into Agile? What kind of people do I even need to work with? And when is UX done? Right? These are the biggest questions we get. All right, so let's tackle the first one. Right? When does UX start? Now, we're used to thinking about a timeline, right, for digital products. There's a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, right? And there's this big part at the start. And we think of tend to think of UX as something that happens in the beginning, but some people also think of UX as something that happens at the end. They think that all this development stuff happens, all the functionality is built, and then we add this UX to it at the end, right? Now that's certainly the wrong way to think about UX. When we think about user experience, there's a great deal of planning that must occur very early. A lot of this includes things like research and so forth. And we tend to think that development happens after that. And I know that a lot of developers care about this because they're frustrated that they're not part of early discussions about requirements, about needs, about technology, about platform. So I know developers and development teams don't like being excluded from the beginning, right? So we need to think together about what's best for a life cycle of a product. And so let's talk about UX and dev being together and starting as early as possible at the beginning and continuing together throughout. Right? This is the premise, is the way we need to think. UX and dev work together beginning, middle, and end. And you can imagine on dev, you're doing lots of planning and its technology and its architecture. These are very important things to think about at the beginning. Same thing is true with UX. It's a different kind of planning. It's about research, it's about users, it's about goals and how they turn into functionality and how they support a system and how they work together with a system. So UX at the beginning does those sorts of things, right? I talked about goals and objectives. These are the things that UX people tend to do because they're trying to figure out what makes a digital product, what it must be like, how it must behave, interact with it. And so we tend to create things like goals and objectives, where we have a big goal and several objectives we have for meeting it, and we predict, well, what should happen if we achieve these goals, and how do we measure it? We might do UX research surrounding what we learn from users and what issues arise from what we learn from observation or testing, and it leads us to plan what a product must be like or how we must improve that product. We might even think about features and functions. User experience people just think about this differently. We think about it in terms of how features and functions support what users already need to do and why. And so we tend to create things and put it into a UX roadmap that we can reference. And all this stuff happens at the beginning. Okay. Now, there are some guidelines to think about here when we think about beginning activities. This is not just something that UX people should do in a vacuum and then sort of hand it off to a development team and developers just take it and I guess I got to do something with this. No. Um, Developers should participate in all UX activities, even if they're just observing. If we're doing user research, developers need to be there. There needs to be a representative from the development team so you can understand how users are thinking and how we're planning for them. It will help later. By the same token, UX people need to be listening to early development conversations about platform, about technology, about performance, about what is feasible and what is not. And if both groups are listening to each other early and are participating with each other early, later things will go well. All right. Now let's think about users a little bit and how they respond to what we make. How do we learn what users want? Okay. How do we learn what they need? Well, UX requirements come from people. Okay. And here are just a set of people that might be our users for our product. Now, when we ask users what they want, or if we ask customers what they wish for, we're doing things wrong. Okay. Now, if there's a wrong way to think about users, right? If we think about our internal preferences, what we already want to build, what we already know we are going to build, what we already know features that are going to go out, and we think about it that way, we're thinking from our perspective out. We're not thinking about how users actually work or what they actually need. Often we focus on what a stakeholder or a subject matter expert says we should do or what they want us to do. But what a stakeholder or an SME says is not necessarily the same thing as what a user says. In fact, it's rarely the same thing that a user says. And we should never ask people what they want because they don't know how to tell us that. They are users. They know certain things. They know what they want to do. They know what their task is. They know what frustrates them. They know what gets in their way, but they don't know how to tell us what features to make. They don't know. And if they just simply say, I want this sort of feature, and we make it, it may be that they hate it and it's not exactly what they wanted because they don't know. So customer wish lists are usually a problem to begin with. We shouldn't do them. Now, the right methods. We should always observe users doing things. Very simple. Okay. Spending time with users, watching them work like a scientist would watch something. How do they operate? What do they do? What are their workarounds? Um, you can watch them and say, "Hey, I notice you have an extra spreadsheet that's not part of this system. What is that? Why do you have that? Why are you putting these sticky notes on your board? Why are you calling this person about something? Uh, Tell me why you're doing that." Because it may reveal problems with a system, or it may teach you about the process, so you learn how to produce a system. This is the one of the biggest secrets and powerful methods you've got. And then, of course, we want users to describe themselves. We want users to tell us what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what gets in the way, right? So that they're the best people to tell us this, right? So these are common templates we have in order to understand a user, and it's all about their tasks, what they're doing, why they're doing it, what frustrates them, what gets in the way. And we have an actual user fill this out. We don't fill this out. We don't do it. All right. It leads us to understand a real user better. And we create personas or user archetypes around this. And this is an example of an actual one. And it's about 90 to 95% completely written by the user, which means we didn't put our opinion into it. It's all them. And that's extremely important, going all the way to the user and letting them tell us what to do. Right? Very important. Okay. Now, another topic. How does UX affect requirements? Right. This is a very tough thing to generally to understand. I mean, 90% of great UX is about great requirements, just about the same way we think about development, same way we think about great functionality. Okay. There are several types of requirements. Just go over the basics, right? There's business requirements. Describe what an organization is trying to do, their goals, their objectives. Functional requirements. We understand this, right? This is what your app must do, what it does, right? But then there's also UX requirements. Now, UX requirements describe how people interact with your product. It's all about behavior. It's all about what happens when things break down. It's all about edge cases, how you handle mistakes, how you handle tasks, how people interact, how the system behaves back. Right. So imagine you're wanting to give someone a wonderful product you made. It's got all the bells and whistles and ribbons, right? Maybe it had amazing business requirements and functional requirements. But then you give it to the user and they're like, what is this? I don't want this. I don't like this. I don't need this. I can't use this. This happens all the time because we're not focused on user requirements, UX requirements, which are hugely important. So then think about who writes requirements, right? Business requirements are written by these types of people, hopefully a business analyst, but not always. Sometimes it's just developers or a development lead. Functional requirements could be any one of a number of people, but it's an engineer, okay? It's an engineer writing functional requirements. UX requirements are written by a UX designer, right? A lead product designer, UX specialist, or maybe a UX strategist, right? So let's look at high-level UX requirements, right? They happen very early in the process. We're learning about interaction of the system based on research. They're kind of a mix of business and function, right? And they're always behavior-based, and they're visualized with wireframes. That's the big difference. They're always part of something that's super visual. So here is an example of wireframes, and they may have notes associated with them. And these notes may be off to the side, but they're describing how the interface is acting. And depending on the software that you use, you can create these with actual notes sitting inside the wireframe. And we use a tool called Axure. There's a number of wonderful tools that do this, and they allow us to write notes about behavior directly into the interface we're working on. And this allows developers, development teams to constantly understand what a UX professional desires out of an interface, because it's really difficult to write that all down without reference to something visual, right? It's very important, and you can create this along the way as you go. Okay. User stories, right? This is something that we typically think is something we build based on, especially in an agile process. But they tend to be written with user-specific language, but they're not really about users. They're about what we say the system should do and how we say users should walk through it. That's very different from understanding how users actually think and what they actually want to do. It's very, very different. User stories tend to have an internal perspective. We're pushing our ideas out to the users and hoping that they could use it well, just hoping. And you and I both know that most complex products made by development teams aren't easy to use. So we are missing something with these user stories, right? So what we need is to bring UX into user stories if you're using them, right? Now, that means there are UX tasks associated with a story. There are things that users must do. There are things that UX people must do to support that. And we need to gauge the effort of a UX team to support that thing. So there's this idea of how we actually do the work and also how a user interacts, right? So that means a UX pro, ideally, right, should write every story that has to do with something that's some important behavior in the interface. That will help you immediately. At the very least, a UX professional should be reviewing all stories. Very, very, very important. Very important. And they should be giving at least input into those stories. That will be a major change in how you develop products. Okay. Now, the big topic, right, is agile, right? Most of us are using an agile process of some kind, right? Some non-linear process. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the rules for that and how UX can fit into that. Right now, you remember our myth of Sisyphus. We're trying to roll that boulder up a hill, and it's this beautiful functionality combined with great usability, but we can never quite do it. Now, development teams, to try to fix that, they say, well, I'll bring the boulder up there differently, right? Of course, that never works, like we said. Changing process doesn't change the fundamental fact. If you change how you get somewhere, but you never incorporate user experience, you never incorporate users into your process, it doesn't matter how you got there. You just get there a different way. Okay. So agile in and of itself is incomplete. Okay. Agile solves development problems. It does not solve UX problems. It was written to help us deliver software development better. All right. How to get to a product, how to ship a product, how to evolve a product, how to continuously make it better. That's agile. It has nothing to do with UX. You have to force fit UX into agile very often, especially if the people running agile teams don't know anything about UX. Right? So you need this notion of leaders in your team who say we are going to fit UX into this process. You need product leaders, product owners who desire to have UX built into the process so that you can. Without that, you won't be able to do it. Right? You absolutely need that. So there's a lot of challenges beyond that in UX and Agile. Okay. The first problem, of course, with Agile when it comes to UX, when it comes to design, is this notion of the whole. How do you see the whole of a system and how people are going to interact with it before you make the pieces parts of it? And when it comes to design, when it comes to UX, seeing the whole is very, very important. We need a broad definition or a broad picture of a digital product's behavior and look and feel, right? And that may mean design, sort of like global context of the design, an overarching sense of what the design will be like and how it will work before we get into the bits of functionality that we begin adding to it. So we also need to plan sprints accordingly, because if you're not planning things like sprints without UX input, you are just going to do it the way developers have always done it. You'll miss the whole, and it'll be very difficult to incorporate UX that way. Once UX gets going, right? Let's say we have some maybe those that early global context becomes like definition and UX related early sprints, right? That developers should be giving feedback to the whole way, right? Before we go, right? But once we get to actually sprinting through bits of functionality, you're going to need your UX team to be ahead of your development team, at least 1 to 2 sprints, because there's so much stuff to get done. There might be wireframes that have to be made. There might be user testing to do. There might be microcopy to write. There might be front end code to author, designs to finish before we get to development and start plugging everything in. So the UX pros have to be ahead of development. And this means that dealing with front end is super important. Front end is a skill in and of itself. The best front end development people I know are specialists in front end. Just because you're a back end developer and can do front end doesn't mean you're great at it. It doesn't mean you are perfectly suited to do that. So front end specialists are a necessity, and they bridge a gap usually between UX design, content, and back end development. And so you can imagine all of these different interfaces that we make that have complex front end associated with them. This is really hard to do for back end developers. This is a specialty. I can't overstate that enough. And these are some very complex, highly beautifully designed interfaces that we've done that require that role. Okay. Now, once UX has done its work and we're sprinting on and development is occurring, UX professionals have to be walking side by side with developers, offering them guidance, because you cannot figure out everything beforehand. That's the essence of Agile, right? We're going to learn things during development. We're going to have to shift. We're going to have to move. We're going to have to level set everything. And you must have a UX person with you, because something will always come up that no one planned for. And you need UX guidance to work on things like interface behavior and interaction and how users would deal with things. So the UX role doesn't end with handing things off. You walk alongside the whole way, because we're a team, right? We're not just siloed individuals throwing things at each other. We have to work together. Now, there's an ideal approach to this. Okay, now if you're really strong at this, you can try this, right? And the ideal approach is that you wait to get into development sprints. Don't go too early. Don't write stories or plan sprints until you know what you're building, and you have a sense of that global context and all these behaviors. And you know how you do that is you just start together. You sketch. You do early sketches of an interface, and then maybe you get further and you get into the wireframes. And if you're really smart, you iterate those with users, UX people, devs, together with users, iterate those until you got a good sense of what you want to do for an MVP. Then you plan your user stories, and then you plan your development, right? This is iteration. This is essentially Agile. It's just a big chunk of Agile before we're doing the development sprints, right? That is an ideal process. That's how you should be thinking. I mean, sketches are so easy. This is an early sketch, right? And this actually is really close to what we ended up designing, right? And then you have those wireframes we're talking about. They're annotated. They're easy to do. They're quick. They're fast. You change them really easily. Even better if you're having users interact with them to help you change them, right? These are not too hard to do. Sometimes we even make prototypes that we have, real click-through and real data in them. Those are also faster to do. And that's kind of the spirit of Agile, right? Can we go quickly? Can we iterate so we can get to something that we can believe in and that we can ship? Okay. When you have all of those things in terms of a wireframe, you're ready. You're ready to write those sprints. That's the idea. That's a great way to do it. It's very difficult for dev teams to do that because they're not used to it. But it is true to the essence of Agile. Okay. You also need that rolling sense of dev and UX that I mentioned, right? We talked about those flexible sprints, right? If you think of a sprint-like development being inherently flexible, then why not have sprints that are really focused on those early activities, research, sketching, wireframes. Why not? We want the developers involved in those anyway. So it's not like we're waiting for development. We bring everyone in right away. And we're going to be able to produce a product that's better, quicker. Right? UX doesn't necessarily throw a ton of time onto a process. It does increase process time, yes, but quality goes way up. Right? So you're still able to deliver quickly within a agile framework, but quality is much higher, and that's really what we want. We want to get to an MVP product that's really strong. It should be as strong as we can make it. And remember, we said UX is sprinting ahead and doing these activities. Developers, by the way, should be reviewing everything UX people do. Remember, it goes both ways. A developer needs to look at this stuff because you need to think about feasibility and you need to think about performance and all the millions of things that developers have to care about when we're planning something. You can't just let UX people just go off on their own and make something that maybe will never work or take too long or kill performance. Developers need to be there, right? UX reviews development. That's what we've been saying. You compare what's happening against UX requirements. You care about faithfulness to the design, to the goals, to the user, right? We're thinking about interaction. We're making little adjustments because we can never plan for everything. We just can't do it. So we've got to think about making adjustments along the way. We've got to think about digital accessibility, making things okay for people with low vision, no vision, motor control problems, all this sort of stuff. And of course, you're building a design system as you go, right? And you need everyone involved in the design system. Certainly not just one group, not just backend developers, or not just the whole development team along with front-end people. You need everyone for that. It's no wonder that we make products that are difficult to use when we just silo out. Of course that happens, right? You must have UX in your process. By UX now, I'm thinking about the designers, the UX pros, right? Maybe it's the strategist, maybe that's the micro copywriters, all those different people. And you might not have access to all of them, but at least one, right? You need. Their job will be very difficult, for sure, but you need that presence. Okay. UX should also be testing, helping test how you're doing QA testing or whatever your process is. UX people look for different types of things. They're comparing the system, the final system, against UX requirements. They're thinking about user behavior. They will find things that other people won't, and that's the point of testing, to find things. Okay. Now, in terms of ceremonies, right, with Agile, everyone calls their meetings something different, okay? But let's just be basic about it, right? If there's sprint planning, okay, the UX lead, the lead UX person needs to be there. That's easy, right? Now, whatever you call that person, we call that person basically the lead product designer. They need to be involved in sprint planning. Easy, okay? Stand-ups. Stand-ups have to include everyone who's working on a thing that we're talking about. That's easy, right? So that may include the lead product designer. It may include a visual designer or a front-end person, or maybe that micro copywriter. If they're working on a sprint, they should be in the stand-up. If we're talking about what went wrong and what went right, well, you need the UX lead again, but then you need those sector leads, right? Who is in charge of design, or who is in charge of front-end, or who is in charge of content strategy? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? Right? They need to be there. If they're not, you'll never find out. Okay. Now, the question here becomes, what UX pros do you need? And you see my previous slide as a unicorn here. A lot of times we look for a UX pro and expect them to do everything. That's very tough. One is better than none, but you do need more than one person. So let's talk about the types of people you need. Right? This is like a sample full project team. It's very, very loose, okay? It generally has these types of people, okay? But the people I'm crossing out are the people we hardly ever have on a team. Front-end, interface designer, UX pro, content strategist. They're hardly ever on a digital product team. That's why these products are poorly designed and hard to use. Okay, those people aren't there. Now, there are various types of UX roles when you just think about that UX pro. All right, we talked about that UX strategist. This might be the person who is doing a lot of the research and goals and objectives and linking user-based design to corporate or organizational strategy. That's a specific type of person. And the UX researcher, they could be the same person. That's possible. The product designer, this is the person doing the wireframes, who's really turning that all into an interface and can really talk back and forth with the whole team about that structure. Then there may be a UX designer developer. This is typically now what we think about when we think about someone who's doing visual design or front end or both. Okay, these are the core types of people that are on a UX pro team. To this, you might add visual design. To this, you might add a content strategist or micro copywriter, things like that. Okay, but the foundational role you cannot do without is that product designer, that person who is making that interface happen, who probably in your org has to do all the research and has to do all the strategy and has to do the product designing. It's too much, but this person is a person you can't do without, and often they end up doing more. Okay, and of course, the question now is, when is UX done? And by now you should know how I feel about that. Okay, we have to redefine this notion of done, because UX isn't done when they throw something over the fence, right, to a development team, because there's guidance to happen during development. There's user-focused QA testing. There's even thinking about what does it mean to roll out an MVP to people and have them understand even the experience of the rollout. Okay, there's much to be done, and this means UX isn't actually done. All right, some of the most important things a UX team could do are happening in the later stages when they've done all their initial work. And also a big part of what we have to do is user testing. If you're not doing this, you need to do more of it. This literally means having users just try to do what they need to do with your system. It's not the same thing as QA testing or unit testing or whatever. This is actually watching real users try to do stuff. Like a scientist, you watch them. And you can test with prototypes. You can test wireframes, right? Even before it's done, you can test it. But we're talking about something in production that you should test and see if you really did it or not, because there's always something. You never get everything right, okay? And in this case, if you're doing user testing, having people try your product, once again, same theme, everyone has to be there. Your lead development resource must be at user tests, must be at least observing what happens. There's nothing like watching users deal with the stuff you make, because when they fail, and if you see them fail all the time, it's just true. There's a problem with your design. There's a problem with what you did. And no matter how much you loved it, no matter how much you think it was right, if it's wrong, it's wrong. And if you see it firsthand in a test, no one's going to argue about it. You all just saw it, right? And then you work on it. Now, we typically, if we do user tests, we might do a lot of documentation. Documentation is for stakeholders and leaders and SMEs who need to be proven to, right? They need to be convinced that testing yielded something. But most of the time, if we just had, a developer and a UX pro, you and me, we got together and did a test, we would see in a day all the things that we have to fix, and a discussion would tell us what we had to do. When we create documentation like this, it's because we're trying to prove to leadership where they need to go, and we need them to agree with users, right? So we put forth documentation. Oh, look, this did well, and oh, look, this didn't do well. I guess the evidence is there. We better do it. That's what that's for. Okay. Now, some things to keep in mind as we wrap up, and I appreciate all your time today. Remember that UX iceberg, right? This sense of what happens up top, the UI, and developers kind of think below is the system, and UX people tend to think below is the UX, right? Well, they're kind of both right, because below the water surface, the greatest part of the iceberg is all of the thinking and planning that goes into making something right. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that in the development side. There's a lot of that in the UX side. When all is said and done, the little itty bitty part that's with, that's the UI, right? We're doing this together, right? UX and development are not separate things, and you shouldn't think about them as separate things. You should think about it as product development, as digital product development. It is one thing. It's one thing. Processes in development, they're all very different. We, or as a consultant company, right, we work with a lot of development teams, and no process is the same. But principles behind it, the stuff that I'm talking about today, they never change. They cross all sorts of processes. And I should mention that you can learn this. I love that you're here in this session. You're curious about it. You want to do it better. This is a start. You can learn about this stuff. All you have to do is be curious about it. Attend conferences like this and move on. So I have a little bit of recommended reading for you to get started. Here's a few good books, right? If you're interested in how UX fits into product development, how we make usable products, but think about a development context, this is a great way to go. These books are excellent. I'll leave it up there just for a second. Subject to Change, Sprint, the UX book, fantastic stuff. You could always read our blog. I mean, we're not selling anything, but we're talking about why development-centered approaches fail. We talk about the myth of Sisyphus. We talk about UX and Agile, right? We talk about a lot of things that you might care about associated with how UX should fit. All these principles that we're talking about. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was building UX into development process. My name is Dean. I'll entertain a few questions right now, but if you don't get a question answered and just want to chat, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to go ahead and to help you out in that way and have a conversation with you. This is tough stuff, but I promise you can do it. So thank you very much for listening. And I believe now, if there are any questions, Francisco, I'm ready for you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dean, for the presentation. Very useful. Very usually on this type of things, it's a lot of in theory it should work like this, and it's like, yes, it's common sense.
That's right.
It's like it's a logic. Companies should operate in that way.
It's hard to do.
I'm checking if we have. Yeah, it's hard. It's super hard. Okay, I have one question from Martin.
Sure.
He asked, any hints on how to deal with leadership that doesn't value UX enough to provide the necessary resources?
Yeah, a very good question. And unfortunately, Martin, I get this question a lot. There's two things you could do. Okay, first, if leadership is not going to invest in UX, then it's going to be nearly impossible for you to make the type of wonderfully usable, highly functional products that you want to make. Okay, we just need to accept the fact that that's true. However, let's say you're committed to your organization and you really want to help. There's lots of things you can do. Anyone seriously interested in UX can learn more and slowly start to push. One of the best ways that almost anyone can start to push on UX is to do user observation and user testing. Anyone can do that stuff. User observation, watch users attempt to do something and record what they do. Be a scientist. User testing, literally have users use the thing you make or have already made, have them go through tasks like a scientist. You watch, record what happens. Anyone can do that. And that starts producing knowledge that maybe your organization will begin to accept. Okay. Those are two things you can do, but I won't tell you that that's going to be easy, right? You have to understand that if you want great usable products, the path to that is very long and very tough if leadership is not interested. I hope that answers your question. The other question I get an awful lot is, what if we don't have access to users? Right? It's a similar kind of question. Either UX isn't valued or I can't get to the end users. Same answer. If you can't get to end users, first of all, you should be constantly trying and asking and pushing for it. That's one. Two, if you can't do it, then get as close to them as you can. If all you can get to are subject matter experts, do all of these tactics, observation, testing with them. Okay, do the best you can. starting and doing a little bit is always better than nothing. I
Cool,
hope that
cool,
helps.
cool. Yeah, yeah. It's it resonates a lot of things like when you say about design and UX. I'm thinking on community. If the company doesn't invest in community,
Mhm.
it's a little bit complicated
Yeah,
to make them convinced. In this case, it's the same. If
that's
the
right.
company
Yeah,
doesn't want to invest in design and user experience, it's a little bit complicated to get that done.
yeah. That is
Um,
right. That's right. Yeah.
Anyways, we are finishing. We are a little bit out of time. I like to keep the schedule nice, tight, and tidy.
No problem.
That's because I'm usually runs from time to time online events, and I know how organization struggles with schedule and timings. Appreciate a lot the talk, Dean. I think that
Thank you.
it's the description and the presentation was super interesting. We'll keep in touch in any case, and thanks again for for being here at the DevOps Pro. Next time we need to drink a beer in Vilnius or something, but at this
Yes,
point I'm gonna take a
absolutely.
coffee. I'm gonna take a coffee after this session. uh,
No
for the
problem.
attendees
Thank
are
you.
still for the attendees that are still here with us, this is the last session. We are finishing for today. We continue tomorrow on online mode, and on Wednesday and Thursday in person at Lithuania in Vilnius. So stay tuned and don't miss any update that we have for this event. Thanks a lot again. See you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.